Mr. President, thank you. Mr. President, I want to give you a quote from a publication. Days after working at Guantanamo Naval Base prison in Cuba, a U.S. Navy veteran found himself behind bars where he could remain for a decade for alleged passport fraud. End of quote. Mr. President, I had to read that article from CNN's website. I had to read it twice. I couldn't believe it, but that's what it said. Former U.S. Army specialist, now Navy reservist, U.S. Petty Officer, Second Class, Elisha Dawkins, 26-year resident of Florida, was arrested in April, and he spent now more than 2 months behind bars in the federal detention center in Miami. And a federal indictment says that the serviceman failed to acknowledge he had once applied for a passport when filling out a new application, something that the prosecutors call passport fraud, something his public defender calls an innocent oversight. And Petty Officer Second Class Dawkins now faces up to 10 years in prison if he's convicted. Now, do you remember John Dillinger? He was sentenced not to 10 years, but to 8.5 years. And that was on a conviction for assault and battery with the intent to rob and conspiracy to commit a felony. Well, Mr. President, we all recognize that falsifying information on a passport has grave implications for our national security. And we want our government to be vigilant and to crack down hard on those who would attempt to sneak in here and do us harm. Zero tolerance. Zero. But according to Petty Officer Dawkins' Guantanamo Naval Base work evaluations, his superiors praised his work ethic and performance. He was a military photographer who, because of what he was photographing, had to have a secret clearance. He, by the way, had that secret clearance when he was an Army photographer in Iraq. And when he went into the Naval Reserves, they threw, and this is according to the U.S. Navy, they gave reciprocity for the secret clearance for him to go into the Naval Reserves. And as the Miami Herald reports in today's edition, he took 7,500 photos during his service in Guantanamo, the 7 months that he was there. This is after his 8 years in the Army, of which he was in Iraq. His evaluation right before this unexpected arrest by the U.S. Navy says that Dawkins, quote, always lived up to the core Navy values of honor, courage, and commitment. Honor and courage and commitment. And he had that secret clearance while he was at Guantanamo, and this morning's Miami Herald chronicles the sensitive photos that he took of detainees there at Guantanamo. And in one evaluation report that was obtained by CNN, a superior lauds Dawkins as a team player with a strong work ethic and a desire to learn, and recommends him for promotion. And it goes on to say, Dawkins is eager to tell the military story and to further the image and success of U.S. service members And that was written by fellow Petty Officer First Class Sally Hendricks. So let's see. Honor, courage, commitment, a team player. Mr. President, I have sought explanations. I've been on the phone. I've talked to government high-ups in person. I've talked to the highest levels in the U.S. Navy, the Army, Homeland Security. I've just been on the phone with the very high levels of the U.S. State Department. And I want to know, does the military stand by the evaluations that they made of this fella? Is Petty Officer Dawkins, is he suspected of other misdeeds? If so, they better get it out. How did they give him a secret clearance while he was named in an old deportation order? Was this case part of an ongoing State Department diplomatic service crackdown on passport fraud? Does the State Department have any additional information that they're not telling us? From time to time, they have intimated that there's something more, but they're not saying. Well, did the U.S. military believe him to be a citizen during all those years of service in the Army in Iraq and now in the Navy in Guantanamo? Well, this case raises a lot of questions, and we need to get to the bottom of it. And I have taken an interest in this case because when I read these stories on CNN, the Miami Herald, the New York Times, and now it's gone all over the country on Associated Press, there seems to be a disconnect in government agency coordination. One hand doesn't seem to know what the other hand's doing. And a Floridian with honorable service in 2 services of the United States military has been in jail being held on a $10,000, on a $100,000 bond. He would have to produce a $10,000 bail, which he obviously doesn't have, and he's been there for over 2 months. Now, Mr. President, I didn't call the U.S. Attorney's Office because I respect the independence of the prosecutorial role. But let me just quote for you this morning's Miami Herald, Carol Rosenberg, the reporter. She disclosed that a federal judge has now said that the U.S. Attorney's Office has made a secret offer to resolve this passport prosecution. The judge revealed the offer of a pretrial diversion in a conference that set a July 12 trial date for Petty Officer Dawkins. The idea, according to the Herald, is to give someone facing charges an opportunity to avoid prosecution through a program such as doing community service or perhaps taking a civics class. And the judge was so taken back by hearing this secret offer that the judge said she was left speechless, and she was quoted in this morning's Herald story as saying it appeared to reflect a kinder, gentler approach to prosecution. So whether the petty officer is released from jail tomorrow or whenever it is, we'll have to see, are there further things? And if it has to do with his immigration status, according to his public defender, which we have talked to, he came to this country from the Bahamas with his mother when he was a kid. He still is not a citizen, but he has served this country for years and years. And so I want to conclude, Mr. President, by saying this. If the facts of this case are, as we have been told, and the scratching and scraping with some reluctance on the part of agencies to talk, if it is as it has been reported to us, wouldn't it be interesting if the DREAM Act were in fact law? Because the DREAM Act would have prevented something like this from happening in the first place. Because the DREAM Act says that if a kid had been brought here illegally as a child, but that child grows up and wants to go into the U.S. military, as Dawkins has for almost a decade already served, then that legislation would grant legal status through a green card to that undocumented young person who wanted to serve the country. So, Mr. President, we ought to pass the DREAM Act. Every day we have examples of children that came here through no fault of their own, but who are unjustifiedly having the law come down on their head. And so I want to close by reading a letter to the editor in the Herald from Sandra Wallace of Miami. And this is what she writes. Elisha Dawkins served 7 years in the military in both Iraq and Guantanamo, where he was awarded medals for his behavior, yet he's being held in federal lockup, awaiting deportation. This man thought he was a U.S. citizen because his relatives told him he was when he came here as a young child. Our military was certainly glad to consider him a citizen. Mr. President, the DREAM Act would allow the U.S. government to consider as a citizen someone who, like Elisha Dawkins, was brought here as a child and who wanted to serve this country. Mr. President, I yield the floor.